This video is my making of Princess Aurora's base dress for NoFlutter's Aurora Ballerina cosplay. I wanted to make the base dress for Princess Aurora at Disneyland Paris, but I didn't want to get into too much trouble by having a long gown, so I decided to make it shorter and more of a Disney bound. A lot of girls started waving at me as a princess at the park, so it was a bit dangerous. But don't forget to subscribe before you fall into a deep slumber and never like this video until 100 years later. Let's go ahead and get into the tutorial. For this project, I'm using my favorite pattern, Simplicity 5006. It's a corset pattern that I've used on many different projects. My lining is going to be a white cotton, and I'm using this jacquard with blue and pink lame. So when you shift, it's actually going to look like magic, and it's changing colors. Luckily for me, I have used this pattern before, so that means it's already cut out. What I need to do now is place it on my lining fabric and pin it. After it's all pinned, go ahead and cut your pieces out. Now I'm going to grab my shell fabric. I'm pinning my lining and my pattern pieces directly onto the fabric. I didn't have a lot of time to come up with this decision, but I thought it would be nice to make sure that everything matched. This way, nothing gets unaligned. I went ahead and pinned it down, and now I'm going to use pinking shears to hopefully prevent a lot of fraying. And so all these pieces are now evenly cut in exactly the same shapes. Time to assemble them all together. I'm first going to go ahead and sew the lining together, and that's the white cotton base. I follow the pattern's instructions to get where I am at this point, sewing and lining up all the pieces together. Now with the curved parts, I need to make sure to clip them. Clipping them will let you have more stretch into your fabric. So I did the exact same thing as my lining fabric with my jacquard fabric. Make sure to line up all your pieces and bring them to the sewing machine. The biggest problem with this fabric is that it is another really woven fabric, and so it will fray very heavily. Part of me thinks that I should have serged all the edges first before sewing them together. I don't know what I could have done or should have done, but even the pinking shears proved to be no match for the fraying power of this fabric. Just a word to the wise, be ready for your fabric to fray if you choose to get this fabric. While I was working on the corset shell, I decided to go ahead and sew down the seam allowance. This way it doesn't fray so much that the seam itself will come undone. This is very important because look at how much fraying was happening while I was sewing. And that's just from being cut. Oh my gosh, not fun. Okay, so sadly to say, I didn't have the zipper that I wanted, so I went and bought one. This one has it's plastic, but it's got this rainbow effect on it, and I totally wanted that. So the downfall is that these always come as an open zipper. But yeah, this was really cheap. So this was 40 crowns divided by 2, so that is 20, which is about $3. I live for that. Before we get any further with the top bodice piece, make sure to iron out your lining and maybe your shell. My shell, I'm very nervous that it would actually melt. I'm not sure how it will act because lame is kind of like a plastic. So I'm just going to iron the lining first and see what I can do later about the jacquard. This is going to help me make sure that the boning casing sewing lines are going to be perfectly straight and the fabric does not stretch or scrunch or have any bad problems. Always iron when you can. Lining layer really flat and pressed, looking fabulous. I'm going to go ahead and use my zip ties, and I'm going to cut these up to size for the bodice top. And then I'm going to sew this together with the main shell. For my boning channels, I cut up white strips of fabric and sewed them to the seams. I put the zip ties into the casings and then sewed them shut. I did this off camera, but I do this a lot in my other videos. At this point, I was really feeling it, Mr. Krabs, so I finished my corset top, but I was feeling a bit tired. I decided to use another dress pattern as my base for the skirt of my dress. I found the waistline of the pattern and pinned it to the pink and blue fabric, and then I cut it out. I made sure that my pink and blue fabric would shift the colorway that I wanted when I moved. So it looks a little bit weird this way on camera, but this is exactly what I wanted when I moved. With the skirt cut out, all I have to do next is assemble it. So I brought it to the sewing machine and sewed it together. I made sure to completely zigzag the edges of the seam allowance because I did not want this fraying all over my legs. Now I could have added a lining to the skirt, but I was running out of time before my trip and I decided just to leave it as is. I had to do some modifications to my skirt so I could attach it to my bodice. I had to cut off a bit of the top, but I had failed to realize that the bottom of my skirt had a weird cut from it. I decided to make the hem all even and I lost about 5 to 7 inches off the bottom hemline. I then hemmed it and attached it to the corset. To finish it all off, I closed it all together with the rainbow zipper I had bought earlier, thus completing my Disney-bound Princess Aurora dress for Disneyland Paris. I may not have had the footage for the zipper and attaching to the corset bodice, but it is very similar to the method that I did for my wedding dress video. So if you want to check out how I did that, feel free to ask me to do it again in a comment down below. I'll be more than happy to repeat these steps and make another corset dress because this is super awesome to wear. Or feel free just to tell me what other Disney princess you would like to see me dress up as. I don't think I mentioned this, but I definitely had to make my own matching mask with my leftover fabrics. It was a little bit small, but it's so adorable. So this is my mask that goes with my dress.